Check those clocks. Smart or dumb, digital, analog sundial. It is a time to think. We are in the Friendship Dojo.
One of the walls is actually kind of falling down right now. I don't know if
it's
you noticed
leaning
that,
in
Josh.
just a little bit. But this is where we do our best thinking.
Yeah.
Some people in the shower, some people in the car. Chris and I don't think at all
That is
unless
correct.
we are surrounded by this
Yep.
partition.
Yep.
So it's once every 3 weeks we do a little thinking.
Yeah, otherwise we're just kind of existent vegetables. So
One thing Chris and I do enjoy doing, a little exercise. Chris, I did a leg workout before I came here. So if I'm weak in the knees around you, it's only 50%.
You'd be the only one.
It's only 50% because I'm nervous around you. The other part is it was the lunges.
Yeah, okay. I'm guessing 98 too.
Yeah.
But
are you back in the gym at all after the
I
surgery?
am.
Or back in the workout game?
Yep. I would say today. So I tried to get back into it last week. Had some unfortunate complications from that, but got back into it yesterday on the elliptical.
Yeah. Today
lifting weights again, and yeah. So.
Yeah, we're fans of exercise on a time to think, and
it is of some value. Physical training is.
Yeah. That verse in 1 Timothy, I think 4:8, can be read to say, well, spiritual value is way more value than physical value.
Right.
But Paul says it's of some value.
Yeah, absolutely.
For the present life. And when you look at a lot of Paul's metaphors that have to do with endurance and perseverance, they have to do with physicality, right?
Yeah. He was probably swole.
Yeah.
Paul
Or
was probably,
he was just a sprinter, you know?
Actually, he was neither of those. He was
the guy who was
weak and
beaten.
frail. Yeah, exactly.
But when he talks about perseverance, which Romans 5, what is it? Character produces, or perseverance produces character, character produces hope, right? Or suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, hope.
And hope does not disappoint us, Josh.
Right. And so we want to think about kind of endurance and where in our lives are we practicing endurance? So maybe you're in some sort of higher education and you have to endure, or you're finishing college, you have to actually endure the assignments.
Or you're married to me and you have to endure.
Hi, friend.
Yeah.
Or physical fitness really is one place where you can practice endurance. I know at the gym that I attend, every workout ends with what's called the finisher. It's usually a 60 to 120 second, like just gets you exhausted at the end of the workout. And when I first started there, I was like, why am I doing another workout after my workout?
Yeah.
And I would leave early sometimes. But it became kind of a challenge of, okay, if I don't want to quit here. And maybe that'll help me not quit in ministry.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll help me not quit in serving my wife. If I'm like practicing daily, don't quit. So we do see exercise as a chance to practice perseverance. And also, Chris, I think you remarked when you had to take a few weeks off that you just felt a little cloudier.
Oh, a couple months off, Josh.
Hazier.
Not pleasant at all. Yeah.
What was your experience? You work out pretty regularly and then you can't work out anymore. How did you feel in that?
I felt awful.
Yeah.
I really felt awful. I mean, I'm not getting any younger. And so it's not, the body isn't as resilient as it gets older when it comes to, how you eat, how you exercise, things like that. And so sitting in a chair for a few weeks, mostly sitting in a chair for a few weeks recovering from surgery isn't the most fun. And so, your body starts aching. And just remarking to Rosalie, I'm, used to, I would say doing single arm curls, 55 to 60 pounds.
Yeah.
And then you're on this restriction where you can't lift more than 20 pounds. Now, thankfully, my surgeon, who was my brother-in-law, was very generous as far as, my restrictions. And so it was just for a couple of weeks, it was 20 pounds, but you just start feeling weak and you're like, oh, this is not pleasant. Your body doesn't like the fact that you're not using it. So.
Yeah. And I think where this ties in in two ways. One, our talk on sexuality today, I want to talk more broadly about theology of the body before we get to sexuality. But even just the nature of our podcast, A Time to Think, I guess I want to emphasize that part of thinking clearly has to do with using your body in certain ways, right? So we generally know if we don't sleep well, we don't think as clearly. If we no one is doing their best writing right after a Thanksgiving meal. When we overeat and we get sleepy, we don't think the same. even when our body is undergoing certain things like physical reactions to anxiety, those types of things all work and they cloud our thinking. And even just this week, I don't like to stay up late. Staying up late for me is 9 p.m.
Yeah.
And there was a couple days in a row where I was up till 10 or up till 11 and didn't get as much sleep. And I have
was one of those the elder meeting, Josh?
No, elder meeting was actually one of the earlier
Really?
nights.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I woke up the next morning. I had less sleep. I kind of had some stress from school assignments. I was tired. I had eaten poorly the night before, so my body just didn't feel right. But I also, when my wife said, "How are you doing?" I was kind of like, "I'm blah."
Yeah.
So I wasn't thinking correctly the same, but I also knew once I hit the gym, I'm gonna think better.
Yeah.
So just to as we talk about a time to think, if you don't have any kind of regular pattern of getting out on walks or weightlifting or running or doing any kind of
Archery.
Stretching routine, just anything.
Something.
We have to engage our bodies in order for our minds to be properly useful.
Yeah.
And that leads, Chris, into a theology that I think we need to discuss in regards of sexuality, which is we are not atomistic beings, not Adamistic, as in from Adam. We are those.
Atomistic.
Atomistic, as in particularized into very small parts that are not related, right? We are unified beings. Yeah. So like I just said, if you don't sleep well, your mind and usually even your will is affected, right? Mm-hmm. How many of us have...
I don't have a will, Josh.
You don't?
No, I'm too young for one.
Oh, are you a robot?
No,
I see.
Written a will.
So how many of us have had fantastic self-control in our diet up until 7:45 p.m.?
Yeah.
And the day gets long and you're tired and all of a sudden your will is weaker.
And Teddy Grahams look really good.
Yeah. And so there is this intersection. We tend to think that our bodies are divorced from our thinking patterns or our desires or our wills, but the scriptures present a picture of the body that is unified. Even the types of commands we have in the scriptures, love the Lord with your heart, your soul, your mind,
and your
strength, right? Your force, your muchness, I gave the analogy of a toddler. Like if you want to see heart, soul, mind, and muchness all going in the same direction, just watch a 3-year-old.
Yeah, take away a chocolate bar, right?
But we tend to divorce these things as if like, well, my heart is primary or my mind is primary. Obviously, on this podcast, we emphasize the mind and the thinking. But one of the things we see in Genesis, one of the things we want to talk about in terms of human sexuality is that problems arise when we divorce body and mind. And
it's not new. It's not new to our culture.
No, it's old.
Yeah.
It's as old as the bad theology we talked about with the Canon series, right? What was the types of things happening in the New Testament times or just thereafter that we still see today, Chris?
Yeah. I mean, I think what's interesting about it is that we have a certain spirituality attached to first century thought that's just basically a furtherance of Platonic thought. Neoplatonism takes root, and what happens is basically the only thing that matters is ethereal, right? The only thing that actually is substantive is the thing that's out there effectively. And so it's a kind of spirituality that says meaningfulness is found outside of the body. Meaninglessness is attached to the body. And then because of that, the lifestyle you live is one that's focused on pleasing the meaninglessness of the body because it's meaningless, right? And so we call that Gnosticism. For those who've been in the church for some time, you've heard that phrase tossed around. You get to 1 John and everything. But yeah, I mean, it's odd because it's not, you have Buddhism, which basically denies the significance of the body as of any importance, right? And so you just want to escape the body. But what we find in Western thought tends to, highlight spirituality, and this is something that we probably hear if we talk to a neighbor today who's influenced much by this. The idea of spirituality is important, but really on a functional basis, on a daily basis, it's let us eat and drink for tomorrow we die.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, an interesting angle on this is one of the early discussions of how do we read the Bible had to do with this ethereal over material, right?
Christ actually have a body, right?
Yeah, the only thing that matters is not matter. So you had Philo in Alexandria, I believe a Jew.
I love Philo. You get what? That? Philo means love in Greek. Anyways,
you're cute.
Yeah.
And so you have Christians following his spiritual interpretation where
Mhm.
they're taking all the physical things and making them spiritualized, because really the scriptures are not about the physical journey. They're about the spiritual journey of getting out of the world of impulses and sensory
Yep.
experience. And so one of the ways early Christians read the Bible was to try to, anything material, we actually have to find the real spiritual meaning apart from it or outside of it.
Allegorization. And,
Yeah. And so there is, a long-standing thing that humans do where they divorce the mind from the body, the spiritual from the material. And where that comes to play in modern times, Nancy Pearcey has done a lot of work on this in a book called Love Thy Body, which is really helpful. She says that the modern world is what I think Francis Schaeffer calls a two-story world. You have the lower realm and the higher realm. The lower realm is the realm of facts and figures and tangible things and scientific observations.
Sure.
And the higher realm is the realm of spirituality. And these realms are functionally divorced from one another, right? And so where she brings that to bear on topics of sexuality is to say that this is really how something like abortion gets legitimized,
Right.
because the higher realm of personhood is divorced from the lower realm of body,
Right.
such that when we talk about a baby in the womb, people are talking about fetuses that aren't persons.
Right.
And you think, well, where did that distinction come from? The idea that, like, where did we divide that the body has not yet become a person?
Yeah.
That's not coming from a biblical worldview. That's coming from a modern division of upper and lower story, a division of mind and body. And so she talks about transgenderism as well, right? How could we get to a point where we say that the body is either neutral or in opposition to my mind if we haven't first divorced mind and body and said mind is superior and primary?
Yeah.
One of the things that we want to do with the book of Genesis, Chris, is reintegrate body and mind for the Christian, right? We're going to see in Genesis 2 that God, with his creative hand, scoops up dust and breathes
Makes
breath.
it significant.
Yeah, and such that Adam is never body without soul or soul without body. He is a
psychosomatic unity.
Psychosomatic unity. Can you riff on that a little bit? The importance of reunifying body and mind. You could talk about for the non-Christian, for the Christian. We could take any angle here,
Right.
but why do we need to reunify body and mind in today's culture?
Yeah, we're very good at dividing things for the purposes of focusing inordinately on them. As human beings, we can do this, all right? And so what's funny is that we have binaries, genuine binaries that exist in the world. So God defines those binaries for us. We don't define those binaries. So God defines binaries like male and female, night and day. We see this in Genesis chapter 1. So there are binaries that exist there. And yet there are things that are not to be divided. So when Jesus says, what God has put together, don't let man take apart. Right?
Yeah.
This is what he's saying about marriage. So male and female come together as one. And so we don't take apart what God has put together. We recognize there's something significant about this union. And when we look at what God does in Genesis chapter 2, we see him taking something that has no inherent significance apart from the fact that it's created, and he gives it significance by breathing. This is why Genesis 2 stands out against Genesis 1, not because it's a different account, but because God is focusing our attention on the significance of those who are made in his image, as stated in Genesis 1, is that God breathes the breath of life purposely and individually into humanity. This is not what happens with animals, right? God creates us uniquely. And so if we see that this is, if there are answers in Genesis about our humanity, what we can see is that our bodies matter and our souls matter. God doesn't just he doesn't put an angel, an incorporeal, entity just showing up on the scene. It's this enfleshed being where he has said, all right, you're created, but you're created with eternal significance. And so when we look at our bodies and we look at our souls, we have to recognize that these things belong together, which is why the picture in Revelation, as we go Genesis, Revelation, we'll be doing this as we preach, is looking at the very end, which is really kind of the restoration of the beginning. And the end of all things is not just, floating souls without bodies. the end is resurrected bodies,
Yeah.
which is why the hope of Jesus' resurrection stands so significantly out for us as Christian people, which is, okay, there will be a day when what has been destroyed, effectively by death, will be brought to life again. And, that's for us. We don't want to take that apart. God put it together at the beginning, and he's going to bring it together at the end.
Yeah, and I mean, even just saying God put it together at the beginning, we should remind ourselves that God's declaration at the end of the beginning, if you will, is this is really
great.
Good, right?
Yeah.
And so one of my professors helpfully showed that there's a fourfold dynamic that you can break the scriptures down into. You have creation, fall, redemption, and restoration, or consummation, whatever you want to say at the end. But you could break down the story and kind of situate where are we at in creation and fall and redemption and restoration. And he said modern reform people have tended to truncate that fourfold into twofold. And we talk a lot about fall and redemption.
Yeah.
And those are fantastic things. Like we can't talk about restoration without fall and redemption, right?
Right.
He said, typically liberals will talk about creation and restoration,
sure,
without fall and redemption.
Yeah.
But he said the holistic, the comprehensive view of the scriptures must emphasize the goodness of creation prior to the badness of fall.
Right.
Otherwise, we're going to be closer to the Gnostic view that the body's bad. Think of how many times you talk about like, marriage, or I got to go to work,
Sure.
And it's almost as if by the way we talk and the way we groan, we imply that these things were created after the fall.
Sure.
I hate going to work, man. It's Monday. This is the worst.
Can't wait to have eternal vacation,
man,
right?
Marriage is just like marriage. And, and there's a distinction here, Chris, where it's work is not a curse.
Right.
Marriage is not a curse. They are both cursed affected by
sin.
a curse, but they're good created things. And the body falls into that category too.
Yeah.
I mean, our bodies have pains. I know, the more I do pastoral ministry, the more I find people who deal with lingering pain every day.
Yeah.
Something that I do not deal with, and yet it just kind of astounds me every time I remember, like, oh my gosh, this person, their body hurts almost all the time. And yet the scriptures do not say that body is a curse. Modern understandings of the two-story dynamic that divorce mind and body think the body is a problem. The body's in the way. At the very least, the body is indifferent. But Christianity says, no, the body's really good. It's good that God made us physical to inhabit a physical. That's part of his wisdom and his pleasure and his goodness and pleasure for us. Just like it's good that those bodies are restored in a physical new heavens and new earth, because that's what we were made to do. We're made to be physical beings in a physical earth. It wouldn't be good if we were made to be physical beings in a physical earth, and then the best thing that happens to us is spirit cloud floating, right? And so the Christian has to remember the very goodness of that dust with life breathed into it, that the image of God is in part a bodily image, or else we're going to tend towards the Gnostic, tend towards the modern secular understanding of the body, which is body bad, in my way, part of the curse, right?
Yep.
Any reflections on that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting how we, like, I don't, and maybe it's just because of how I read. I don't tend to read people who will diminish the significance of the body. But I do think what I find interesting is the fact that when we find the body as a problem, the way that we tend to treat it as a culture, all right, this is not church. This is how does the culture treat the body as a problem, is pamper and treat the body. So like we see the body as problematic. So the solution is not to find some kind of like actual wholeness. It's like engage in as much pleasure and as much youthful restoration as you possibly can and preserve that body. Even though you've materialized the entire human experience, you've said that the spiritual doesn't matter. And so in that process of saying the spiritual doesn't matter, we're just going to treat the body as though it is such an object to be worshipped, even though we think that is the biggest problem we have, because there can't be any problem if there's no spirituality.
So if we limit everything to material by saying there's nothing to be worshipped, then the material is what is worshipped.
The material is what's worshipped. And in the process of worshiping the material, we recognize that this is both our problem that we have to fix, and the solution is to actually make the perfect example of this is when people get like Botox and fillers and plastic surgery. It's like, hey, I'm getting older, and then let's do something. And in the process of doing something, you actually accelerate the aging process by doing something completely unnatural to your body, in the hopes that somehow you're going to appear more as you would have liked to have been naturally. So this is just kind of the confusion and irrationality of a worldview that refuses to acknowledge the goodness of the human experience as both enfleshed and spiritual, at the same time. When we become completely materialistic, and I don't mean that in the, kind of like, oh, you're a materialist, but in a worldview sense, we become completely materialistic, then we throw everything we can at something that we can't fix. So.
Yeah, there's another angle too where Christians we're guilty of not taking into account how the use of our bodies affects our minds and our souls.
Sure.
And so we talked about exercise.
Yeah.
If we do not exercise and release stress and build endurance, then we are going to be we're going to have less perseverance in some ways. We're going to, obstacles are going to feel more daunting. If we haven't proven physically that we can overcome challenges, then mentally the challenges are going to feel bigger. If we haven't relieved stress through exerting energy, then we're going to be carrying this latent stress, often this latent anxiety around with us. So there's that. There's also the ways in which we use technology. I mean, it's pretty crazy how often I'm like, oh, I didn't sleep well last night. It's probably because I just looked on my phone until my eyes hurt and fell asleep. And then, it's usually, I'm not saying 10 out of 10 times, usually if I read a book before bed, slow down my mind, I sleep better than if I scroll before bed.
Sure.
But we don't often take inventory of those types of things. Say, how I affect my eyes and my mind and the stimulation actually affects my body, and then it affects later my will and my soul and all these different things, because we don't see ourselves as holistic people. And really that comes from a non-biblical worldview, right? So we're talking about some of this stuff because when we encounter issues of sexuality, whether it be pursuing passions and pleasures, like who you can sleep with, whether it be trying to change gender, whether it be something like I guess abortion, I wouldn't say is necessarily an issue of sexuality, but it's kind of tangential to that discussion. All of these things involve a presupposition. There's your apologetics term. This is how it fits into the apologetics discussion. They involve presuppositions about who the human are, who humans are. And so that's something we want to be aware of, is if we're discussing with someone who does not have a biblical worldview issues of sexuality, we need to have in our minds at the ready, this person likely comes in with a presupposition that body and mind are divorced. And we need to be ready to ask them, how do they know that? Where did they get that idea from? How can they prove that body and mind are divorced? I do want to talk more specifically about issues of sexuality. We can talk about, and maybe, Chris, let's try to do it as much as we can in tandem with Genesis 1. I don't know how much you talked about the issue of, how much did you talk about the issue of male and female when you preached through Genesis 1?
That's coming up. That's going to come up with the creation of woman out of man. That's going to come up, and that's going to be pretty much the discussion will be that time. So,
gotcha. Yeah. I didn't zero in on it other than to say, I guess the point that I made, you can tell me if this was good, bad, or neutral, was in the ancient audience. This point is made very subtly. And this is kind of interesting to me, is for the ancient audience, God is saying, it's not just kings that are in my image, and it's not just males that are in my image. It's male and female. Male and female together have dominion. Female not lesser, but alongside, co-equal with male in ruling and having dominion. I mean, the megaphone there was, females are not inferior, right? But it's said kind of so subtly, isn't it? There's not a 2-page tome on that. And I think what I was trying to get our congregation to see is, I think the implication for us is subtle too. So it's like loud and subtle at the same time.
Okay.
And what I drew from it was, number one, very good. We already touched on that. When God creates bodily image bearers, he ends by saying that's really good. The body is part of really good. That's number one. And number two was, the image of God necessitates male and female together. It is not Adam that wholly images God. It is Adam and Eve,
Yeah.
right? And how that plays into the transgender discussion is, in order to have male and female co-equal yet distinct,
Yeah.
coming together to image God, you actually have to have male and female.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a spectrum instead of a binary, you
Mm-hmm.
can't have male and female.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can't have male and female, you can't have the image.
Right.
And so in our modern culture, I think the point that I was trying to make was, almost as in passing, very subtly, the loud point, ironically, is we must have male alongside female,
Mhm.
equal yet distinct,
Yep.
or else we don't have the image of God. And so that's kind of, I didn't necessarily get into gender stereotypes or even the roles and functions there, but just to try to say, this is really important.
Boys rule and girls drool.
Isn't it that boys go to Jupiter to get more? Never mind.
Get more stupider.
Get more stupider.
Yeah.
But I think the point there, Chris, is like trying to get Christians to see that we're not only looking out at the culture and saying, no, that's wrong.
Mhm.
There are many things to look out and say, no, that's wrong, but to also know what to proclaim the goodness of the body, goodness of needing male and female,
Right.
equal yet distinct in order to image God. And maybe that's where I was trying to drive at, is we can save some of the pointing out of what's going on wrongly in the culture, but Christians can also often forget to establish how much better what the Bible presents is. Like it's better that the body is good, that I'm not opposed to my body, that I'm holistically connected.
Yeah.
Any other reflections on kind of the male and female dynamic in Genesis 1 or 2 and how it relates to modern issues of body or sexuality?
Yeah, in our men's group in Stevens Point right now, we're going through The Masculine Mandate by Richard Phillips, which is a phenomenal book. Highly recommend any man read it. And we were on the 6th chapter last night talking about man and marriage, effectively. Okay. And Phillips, who shares our same theological convictions about masculinity and femininity, a complementarian perspective, biblical inerrancy, all these things, it makes a provocative point similar to what you just indicated, which is men, you can't really be men without women. Like there is an aspect of masculinity that is highlighted by femininity. And so, he makes the point in this chapter to say, men, unless you are specifically called to singleness or you are unable to provide for a wife, then you should seek a wife, because you will miss important aspects of your masculinity in that. And this is not just about human sexuality. This is about just how God has made male and female. And, I think it's important for us to continue to highlight this because, while we would stress the significance of male leadership and female support and help within, the social dynamics of the home and the church and everything like that, at the same time, we also want to stress the goodness of being male and the goodness of being female. And we can't just, I think part of the issue sometimes comes in where people say, there's effectively the pushback to the idea of male leadership is to say, well, that means men are better. And that's not true. And so I think we need to do a good service to women by saying it is good to be a woman. It is good to be a man. It's not like you got a consolation prize if you're a woman. There is something beautiful and significant about femininity that, even the Apostle Paul highlights, where it's like, hey, now man comes from woman, right? So women give birth to males. That's part of this process now, as he's talking about the significance of male headship and everything. So we're not, Paul says we're not independent of women. Yeah. And we need to honor that fact as we look at God's image reflected in humanity, that there's this beautiful togetherness that exists between men and women that we need to champion and highlight and celebrate. There's goodness there, even as we champion and celebrate and highlight the differences that are reflected in complementary roles. Yeah,
that's one thing that I was thinking about in preaching on Genesis 1, 26 to 28 is how to proclaim, and I was thinking particularly in terms of children in our church, how to proclaim it's good to be a boy, or it's good to be a girl. And how to do so. It's always a challenge to do so in in biblical terms rather than culturally stereotypical terms, even though there are significant ways in which the biblical ties into the culture, right?
Sure.
Because, take the issue of long hair. Talking to a brother of mine who has long hair, well, is he trying to be a woman because he has long hair?
Mm-hmm.
No, because not everyone who grows out their hair is trying to look like a woman,
Correct.
but there are certain things that women do in this day and age, in this culture, that if a man did those things, you'd have to ask, are you doing that for any other reason than to try to look feminine?
Yeah.
And so there isn't a way to totally divorce the biblical from the cultural, and yet I often feel like, okay, that's a little too stereotypical to say that's what a man is or that what a woman is.
Mm-hmm.
However, I wanted to look at the boys and girls in our church and say it is good to be a boy.
Mm-hmm.
In particular because I think what happens a lot these days is young boy, young girl hits puberty, and it's hard. I mean, it's not fun.
Was that a hard experience for you, Josh?
I don't remember.
It was really easy for me.
So I don't actually remember it, but I have seen friends' kids recently where it's like, man, some of the hardest 2 years of their lives are from 11 to 14.
Absolutely.
And they're more volatile, or they're more depressed, or they go from bubbly to apathetic, and you're like, okay, there's something hormonal, emotional going on here. So how do we, in a culture that looks and says, hey, if you're really struggling with this transition, it might be because you're not
supposed to transition, right?
Gender, right? Or if you're really struggling to fit these cultural stereotypes, it might be because you're not that gender.
Yeah.
We need to have a better message than that. And so we want to be able to look at kids and say, it's good that you're a boy. It's good that you're a girl. So Chris, how do we look at children with a biblical worldview and say, this is the goodness of being a boy growing to a man? This is a goodness of being a girl growing to a woman.
Yeah, I mean, it really begins, and I think this is probably where good gospel presentations begin, is with God created. I mean, that's where it has to start, because we can't, you talk about those 4 steps of gospel presentation and redemptive history and everything. We can't just go fall to redemption. Be like, oh, there's something wrong, the fall. Like, there's something wrong because something was right at the start. And so, God's design, this is where we should take headship discussion, right? Where we look at God's design for male and female. It doesn't just happen after the fall.
Right.
There's some people who will push back on that idea of biblical headship and say, oh, see, it's just a product of sin. It's a product of a fallen world. No, it's not. This is God's design from the beginning, and sin complicates it. And so in the same way, we can take a look at being male, female. It was good in the beginning, and now sin complicates it. And you think about the awkwardness of those teenage years. And I didn't, from my own part, my own experience, I didn't struggle with the idea of, my hormonal changes. But man, the awkwardness that comes from the changes that happen socially and everything like that, it's like that's where we see the difficulty that sin imposes. Because, if you are, let's say, I don't mean to sound graphic here, but let's say you're the first girl in your class to hit puberty, right? And all the other girls are still looking like they did when they're 7, 8 years old, and now you're looking like a 12-year-old. That has social implications really for you, right? For you. Exactly. Yeah. And likewise, if let's say you're a boy, and all these other guys around you start shaving when they're 14, 15. And you're 17 years old.
I was a late bloomer, Chris.
Yeah. Hey, I was as well. I mean, I didn't really start fully shaving until I was late 20s probably. But that being said, like my voice got real deep. I shot up when I was around 15, 16. But before that, I was literally singing soprano parts in choir class. And so what does that look like when you've got your buddy who's like, hey, I can grow a mustache. And it's the cheapest looking mustache I've ever seen, right? But you're in this spot, whereas you get older, like I can't grow a mustache right now, and so you just want to try really hard, and so sin imposes these social implications where people get teased, they get made fun of because they're not like other people, and I think that's really the place when we think about the transgender movement. I don't mean to oversimplify because there are all kinds of factors that go into this, but sin has imposed these social these things that come in and they just distort and twist and make a mess out of the human experience during that very critical time. So that, if somebody's introducing the idea of like, well, maybe you're not supposed to be like, oh, well, that's an easy solution because I can't change the people around me. So maybe I just take these hormones and that'll make me different and better. It won't solve the problem though. So when we talk to boys and girls to say, being a boy is good, being a girl is good. Sin is not good, though. And all of the difficulties you experience in this world are a result of sin.
Yeah, and so I think you said earlier the reason we know something has gone wrong is because something was right.
Yeah.
And when you kind of go around and you hear maybe some modern arguments for something like transgenderism, it's interesting. I think you can hear something like, well, people can say God doesn't make a mistake, but in terms of they need to transition, it feels like a flip of what it should be. But there's this struggling of like, well, maybe I'm thinking out loud here, without creation fall, we can't say at the same time there's goodness and badness. If we only have Gnosticism, it's all bad. Right? Matter is bad from the beginning. It's an opposite force. We need to overcome it. If we only have kind of a view of, I don't even know if this would be super present, but if we don't have a view of the fall, then we think everything that is current is normal and good, right? So we don't have any type of theology of why my body and my mind would feel opposed to each other. But when we have creation and fall, we are able at the same time to say, there's a reason that your body is both a really, really good thing and has some really hard effects.
Right.
There's no other way to say those two things at the same time unless you have the story of the scriptures where the body is created and then sin intervenes as an alien parasite and causes curse and decay and death. Well, if we start there, then we have creation and fall. We also move on to redemption and restoration. So when we're talking, like we keep talking about the transgender movement, the promise of hormonal change and transition is a promise for redemption. It's a promise that you can be whole again. Isn't it? It's a promise that if you pursue this path by changing your body so that it fits your mind, then you'll experience wholeness. Better. That's the promise. Well, many detransitioner stories are showing that promise was void. So then as Christians, we come in and we say, okay, we need to be able to the culture and to Christians to say the body is very good. It's also distorted by the fall. It's also part of Christ's redemption. Romans 8 talks about the groaning of creation, the redemption of bodies. Our redemption in Christ is not just spiritual. And then the new heavens and the new earth is a physical place. And so the story of the scriptures gives us not only the resources to say, body very good, even though it's distorted and painful in many ways, but also as part of what Christ is doing to make all things very good again. And the end of all things is an absolute peaceful unity between body, mind, soul, and strength. And so one thing apologetically we want to be able to do is if we're engaged with someone who is either experiencing the pains of and this is something I mentioned in my sermon, Christian, we can be sympathetic if someone feels the pains of a dissolution between body and mind. We all, to some degree, feel the pains of the kind of Romans 7 dynamic that, like, I know what's good, but I can't do it, and there's this opposition between my will and my heart. Like, we all experience the disintegration of the fall, even if some experience it in a more dramatic way, like the disintegration of body and mind. We can sympathize with that. And also use the gospel as the better hope, that Christ will reintegrate you. Christ will reintegrate, will make you whole again. Any thoughts apologetically on how we use the Christian story, not just to attack the badness of a current ideology, but to promote the goodness of what God has revealed in Christ?
Yeah, I think it locates the problem for people, and then it locates the solution for people. Because the kind of aloneness that humanity experiences now, it's me and my phone, and then people that agree with me online. That's pretty much Western culture at this point. We gather in groups of people that never disagree, and if somebody disagrees with us, then they basically committed, some type of heretical, apostate action. You just think how siloed political parties are now, right? Somebody expresses a little bit of disagreement with an individual. RFK comes to mind as somebody who, kind of went outside of the bounds of you think of what is the Democratic Party, the Kennedys, historically is the Kennedys. And then you have RFK who kind of goes out of step with a couple of things, not everything. I mean, he still has some liberal views on things, goes out of step, and he's just absolutely pilloried. And it's like, oh, that's destroyed this guy's life. And that is, I think, in large part due to the fact that culturally we're not okay with the idea of people disagreeing with us in any way. right? So if there's any form of disagreement, we've basically crossed a line that's terminal. And when we are living that way, and then we're making decisions for our own lives on the basis of like, let's find people who agree with us wholly. And if there's any kind of disagreement, they don't deserve any time. We're not going to give them any space to listen to what they have to say. I think addressing people who are living in this world where they're identifying problems and solutions with other people who have the same problems, coming up with the same solutions that aren't actually working because they're in this echo chamber, right? Mm-hmm. And so what we do when it comes to sharing the gospel with people, communicating scripture, is we're saying that there's a bigger picture in this world than just you. Yeah. It's not just you. And your personal experience is people who experience gender dysphoria, like it's a real thing. It's not like it's just made up, but the solution isn't to humor it.
Yeah.
It's to say gender dysphoria is a symptom of a bigger problem that all humanity has. We go back to like body image issues. Mm-hmm. How do you help somebody who has body image issues? Do you think, if I am this skinny girl trapped in a big girl's body, is the solution to like, well, let's give you liposuction, and that's the solution is going to be making you this person that you think you should be? Or is the solution, hey, you know what? This is a broken world, and your body is broken, and our minds are broken. And let's find a wholeness, mm-hmm. actual wholeness, so that we don't think the real problem is just this one focus area. Yeah. And I think that's where we can really help people. And we need to be careful when we address people, because the reality is things like, gender transitioning and everything, they're absurd. They're biologically absurd. They're rationally absurd. But for people who go through it, at least today, the majority of people go through it, these are individuals who just have said, I've got no other hope, nowhere else to turn. This is the only thing I can think of.
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought up the body image piece, because it'll kind of lead us maybe to our last thing today, because I want to provide even more resources for how do we as a church talk about masculinity and femininity, but also how do we just build discipleship tools to regularly remind children in the church of the goodness. And one thing that can cause, for me as a pastor, trepidation is, how do I talk about male and female without offending someone by being overly stereotypical?
Sure.
And there is a danger when you start talking about, even if I said something like, God has made men's bodies with a certain degree of strength mm-hmm. that is different than women's bodies. Yeah. And God has made women's bodies with a certain degree of capacity for nurturing and life-giving. Mm-hmm. I'm only like 2 steps away from overly generalizing certain things. And yet, if we say nothing, then people are going to fill the vacuum of what it means to be male and female with a cultural thing. And what's very interesting about the whole transgender movement or modern society is, even as it tries to eliminate the barriers between male and female, when someone transitions, they still usually occupy stereotypical roles of male and female.
Right. Yeah.
And so what I want to be able to do as a pastor, and I think what we should try to do for our discipleship, is to be careful in how we speak about the differences. Yep. And all the while knowing there is some chance we're going to stereotype and generalize, mm-hmm. not in a discriminatory way, but we're going to make a gross generalization at some point. Then maybe gross is not helpful there. We're going to try to take biblical principles, try to generalize them based on certain things we're seeing around us, in hopes that we can give someone a target to even aim at. Because if we don't, they'll get a target from elsewhere.
Yeah.
So one thing, I'll just give a couple examples. I will tell my son, Holland men use their strength to help others.
Yes.
Okay. So, and I think that's a uniquely masculine message. Mm-hmm. I want him to know that he will be, he's big for his age. He's the older brother. One day he's going to be bigger than his mom. Mm-hmm. He might be bigger than me. Mm-hmm. There'll certainly be a point where he's stronger than me, right?
Sure.
And I want him to know from an early age, you will be stronger than many people around you. Mm-hmm. Use that for their good.
Yep.
I think that is a uniquely masculine. Mm-hmm. I think, without overly generalizing here, it seems that the scriptures provide a view of femininity that has beauty as a main component in a way that males do not.
Correct.
I find it interesting that usually both straight men and homosexual men will both comment on the beauty of women.
Sure. Yep.
Because we all kind of see this movement towards how women uniquely display the beauty when women get together and get more excited over adornment, not in an idolatrous way.
Mary Kay parties.
Just excited that you look cute in the blouse. I like that for you. This is great. That there's just an excitement there about beauty that I think is more common to females. And the scriptures will say Abigail was beautiful and wise. You know, and so it's not just beauty. It's alongside wisdom and courage, but it does seem to be that beauty crops up more for femininity than masculinity. And we want to be okay with, I mean, sometimes there will be, you know, young girls that are wearing a dress for the first time. It's good to say, you look lovely.
Yep.
That's a good thing. And so there's ways where we can identify and help young boys and young girls see the differences between masculinity and femininity, without putting everyone into a corner that you have to be a certain type of beauty in order to be a female. Right. So any reflections there, Chris, on how we try to, with biblical foundations, speak about strength and beauty or service and nurturing, those types of things in male and female ways?
Yeah. I mean, I've got 6 experiences of that, right? with my kids. 5 of them are feminine. 1 of them is masculine. You know, to speak to the masculine point, I just the other day, I mean, here's the funny thing, and please don't think poorly of me as a dad for this, but sometimes my kids will get in fights, you know, and I don't mean they're going to punch each other in the face and throw each other to the ground, but, you know, sometimes so-and-so will hit so-and-so, you know, and they'll get into the back seat and they'll just like, right. Okay. So, you know, the other day I had to address my son and I'm just like, Simeon, even if your sister hits you, you never hit her back. Yeah. Because it's not right for a man to lay hands on a woman. It's just, that's not proper. You don't do that. And just explain to him, you know, Simeon, your strength, in the same way you talk to Thomas, is to say your strength, Simeon, is to be protective. Yeah. You know, you are going to be bigger and stronger than pretty much everybody around you. As you get older, if you're anything like your dad, like you will be the one that stands out. That's just what's going to happen. You need to use that to protect other people. You don't do that to bully people. You don't do that to hurt people, because it is properly masculine to use strength to protect. That's a masculine trait. Now, it doesn't mean that women can't be protective. I mean, mama hens are, you know, they gather their chicks and whatever. But, you know, by and large, what you're looking for when a guy shows up in a room and he's threatening everybody, you don't look for the guy who's cowering in the corner, who's like, oh, I'm just, I'm too frail. I mean, you look for the guy who is able to deal with the threat. That's what you do. And so, you know, you emphasize to your son, it is good for you to be strong for other people, right? And then, you know, conversely, when it comes to women, it is good to be a help. It is good to be helpful to a man in the purpose of a marriage, of pursuing the glory of God displayed in a family and in the church. Like, these are good things to do. You know, the funny thing is, with my 5 girls, you know, there's more personality difference here than with my 1 son and himself. But, you know, with my 5 girls, there are personality differences. You know, one of my girls loves playing sports, just loves playing sports. Now, that doesn't mean that she's a boy. It means that that's an interest of hers that's different than, you know, maybe one of her sisters is. And so what we want to do is we want to highlight specific feminine or masculine traits that do not infringe on preferences and just hobbies, right? Like, I don't hunt. I don't do that. You know, I like to cook. I also like fixing cars, you know, so there's different interests I have that can be more masculine or less. But at the end of the day, you know, my masculinity is expressed in issues of character and in issues of how I relate to people, not in just the things I like. Yeah, it's expressed in function, really. Right. And that's a lot of what the Bible gives us, is functional things. And I would encourage anyone to look at scriptural examples. You know, 1 Corinthians 10, I think, says of the Old Testament in particular, these things were written down for our instruction. Right. For us who upon the end of the ages has come. And so how are we going to be instructed in maleness and femaleness? Well, let's look toward the Old Testament. There's a bunch of males and females in the Old Testament. And the way Boaz protects Ruth is different than the way Ruth honors and serves. But Ruth's hardworking, man. Right. Like, it's not as if
to be feminine is to lay down.
Yep.
Like Ruth is industrious. Proverbs 31 woman is industrious. And yet there is a difference between the protection of Boaz and the service and honor and hard work of Ruth. There is a difference in the idolatry of the physique of Saul, such that the Israelites want someone who's tall and strong and looks the part. All the while, they're not relying on the strength of the Lord.
Whose character was cowardly and self-serving.
Right. And so strength without character is nothing.
Yeah.
And so that's good for the male to see that picture. It's good for the male to be reminded of the passivity of Adam and to see that as bad and to see taking responsibility as a good thing, both for your own emotions and for other people.
You know, one of my favorite proverbs, Josh?
What's that?
Like a ring of gold in a swine's snout is a beautiful woman who lacks discretion. Right. So again, we go to the whole idea of like, you're fitting the bill, but your character is awful. So that, we have to, this just goes to the whole idea that you open up with of we don't divorce these things where it's like, oh, physical beauty, physical strength. This is masculinity. This is femininity. Femininity is character oriented. So even though there might be a physical beauty involved, I mean, godly women are much more beautiful than ungodly women, even though physicality might be the same or even better, if you want to call it that, from an ungodly perspective. But there's a certain sourness and bitterness that attaches to that. Just like if a woman looks at a man who's, Mr. Ripped guy who's ready to step in.
Buffoon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Then it's like, what respect is there to be given to that man?
Yeah. And then the scriptures also present us dynamics where we're able to speak in terms of something like courage, right? So is courage a male thing or a female thing? Well, it's going to be expressed in masculine and feminine ways, right? So you think about Abigail. It's one of my favorite pictures of femininity in the Bible because I think she gives us a holistic picture. Yeah. Abigail is described as beautiful. She's also described as wise, and she also expresses courage, and she expresses courage in submission. And so she functionally and it takes great courage to stand before a murderous king. Yeah. Because you know that Yahweh will protect you. It's like the same thing in 1 Peter, I think, that says, be like your mother Sarah, who feared nothing that is frightening. I love a godly woman who is unafraid because she fears the Lord. Yeah. There is a power there, and yet it's a uniquely feminine power. And so we want to use these scriptural examples because they're going to help us flesh out that we're not saying strength necessarily is a masculine thing or a feminine thing. We're saying that it is a thing that is expressed in different ways. And here are the pictures we have of that in the Bible, like Abigail, right? She's courageous in an honoring way, and that gives us a picture of holistic femininity. Maybe if you're listening, you're going, well, how does that all play into this whole, like we started off talking about body and transgenderism. Well, if we don't think through these things now, we can't actually look at our sons and our daughters or look at men and women that are coming to Christ in our churches and say, no, there's a goodness to maleness, a goodness to femaleness. We need both, equal yet distinct, in order to image God. Right. And we cannot distort those things. They fit together in certain ways. Even if you're an unmarried man, you need sisters in the church, right? And so you can express your masculinity. And you can be protective and caring for women in that way. You're an unmarried woman, you can still be fruitful. We're going to talk about that, at least in Wausau this Sunday, about the fruitfulness of gospel ministry. And there's a fruitfulness that's still available even to the single. You can express masculinity and femininity in those ways. If we're not equipped to tell of the goodness of the body, the goodness of male, the goodness of female, then people are going to be left searching for cultural examples. And right now, that's a really bad place to search, right? So we hope that these conversations today are helpful apologetically so that you can be prepared to give a defense for the goodness of male and female, the goodness of the body, the goodness of God's created order that, yes, is affected by the fall, but is being redeemed in Christ and restored in the new heavens and the new earth. Amen. Thanks for taking some time to think.